Hello, Tashideleg. My name is Lama Rikse. Gonchok Nandro. And I am a Buddhist teacher. And I have been taught in the Bhutanese and Tibetan traditions of the Nyingmapa and Kagyu lineages of Vajrayana Buddhism. And I am hopefully here to teach the American tradition of Vajrayana Buddhism, or the American tradition of Buddhism, which, near as I can tell, does not exist yet. And I think that is a great and grand tragedy, and is something I would like to help fix. And there's many reasons why this has not happened yet, and I want to also mention that there is precedent for this type of transplanting. So if you go to India, there's an Indian Buddhism. If you go to Tibet, there's a Tibetan Buddhism. If you go to Bhutan, even though it's very similar, it's a Bhutanese Buddhism, and it has unique traditions. If you go to Japan, there's a Shingon, which is a Vajrayana Buddhism of Japan. If you go to China, there is Vajrayana Buddhism of China. If you go to Mongolia, there is Vajrayana Buddhism of Mongolia. And there's also, the Theravadan Thai tradition, the Mahayana Chun tradition of China, the Japanese Zen tradition, Mahayana tradition of Japan, and so on and so on and so forth. So the great service that these transformations or differences, new beginnings for something ancient, is that they find the strengths of the culture and they find a way to integrate those strengths, and they find the strengths of the people and they bring those strengths out in the people in a way that generates virtue and wisdom. And for instance, in Japan, there's something called Zen archery, which Buddhist archery is very strange. If you look at the philosophy of Buddhism, Shantideva, who is a Mahayana icon, says, don't talk to anyone that carries weapons. So what are we doing? There's even sort of a Zen tradition of swordsmanship, which is a little more informal, but it exists. But the point is that the Buddhists who were living there eventually understood that war was a part of the culture, and that was inescapable. It was something that was in the blood and in the ground. And I believe there are many such strengths within Americanism. And, they fundamentally clash with Vajrayana Buddhism. And it makes it very difficult for students to adapt and very difficult for them to thrive because, above all, I think Americans are extremely individualistic and rebellious. And so we don't like kind of blind faith or to follow people because, and many people force themselves into that role because that is the Tibetan tradition. The Tibetan tradition is borderline cultish with its following of lamas. Now, as I said, I'm formally trained, and with my Tibetan lamas, you will see me act in accordance with the cultural tradition, because that's how you act. When in Rome, you do as the Romans do. But I don't see that as a great benefit to most Americans. I actually see it in some ways to be a hindrance. I think it's very good that they are part of the mandala, that they are part of the Sangha, that they are included. I mean, really nothing better than that. But when I'm observing the development and progress of Tibetan Vajrayana students in America, or Vajrayana students in American Vajrayana students, following Tibetan or Bhutanese teachers, the clash of culture does not seem to be a subject which the teachers wish to broach. They wish to continue on with the tradition of their culture, which makes perfect sense. It's what they're used to. The one obstacle which I think is extremely problematic, and maybe I can put it into two parts, but they feel very connected, is that most Americans have a problem of self-worth. They feel fundamentally unworthy, and they feel like they must do more. You know, they have a deep need to strive to prove themselves, and it's often seen as a form of arrogance in Tibetan culture, and as a result, it's not necessarily rewarded very well. And the thing is it is, and some people will not like this terminology, other people will agree. The thing is that it is based in low self-esteem and self-hatred, and you know, however, to whatever level people are aware, you know, perhaps it's just easy enough to say lots of Americans do not like themselves, and they want to like themselves, and they feel that they need the approval of some sort of authority to make that happen, and they don't know to remedy it within their own hearts and minds. They look to remedy it by excelling at something and being recognized at excelling at something. That's a huge part of American culture, you know. Get extremely successful at something, and then be recognized, and then, oh, you've made it. Now you're one of the good ones, and now you've won life. And that does not at all reconcile the great truth that the Buddha stated initially, which is life is suffering. So it's as if people are striving very, very hard for a mirage. Whatever achievement they may achieve, it's not going to satisfy them if they do not transform their minds. And transforming your mind is actually, in the Tibetan tradition, one of blind faith, and requires a rugged and almost militaristic discipline that most Americans are simply too soft, too broken down, too damaged to live up to. And that was part of my story. Part of, you know, I'll try and be as brief as possible, but when I was recognized as a child, and also when I gave rise to certain signs which were authentic and extremely profound. I went to look for a teacher that would embrace me and would hold me as their disciple and allow me to continue as a toku, or as at least as someone with a recommendation from a high lama, and someone who, and most importantly, someone who would train me formally. Now, I did meet one Kempo who embraced me utterly as I was, not waiting for some other thing, but accepted me, and he taught me the most profound teachings of the Nyingmapa lineages in both the Longchen Nyingtik and the Drum Tersar lineages. I apologize for all the inside words if you're not familiar with Vajrayana Buddhism. I promise I will get to the American Buddhism at some point. Anyways, I guess you could say I had daddy issues, and I was really looking for some recognition of all the insanely hard work I was doing. I was working myself to death. I was getting sicker and sicker, and I was suffering from a very shameful addiction problem, and secretly I was very depressed, and that would not have gone well with what I was trying to do and the culture I was trying to fit into. So I just suppressed those parts of myself as much as possible, and I pushed on and I pushed on and I pushed on, and eventually I just got to the point where the stern, cold, cold approach of not pointing out when people are doing well and never really encouraging people, because Tibetan culture has a lot of baggage around arrogance and pride and haughtiness, and it's extremely looked down upon. And they also have a lot of baggage around duty, and it's very much a culture of, you do whatever you're told, and there's no like, oh, my knee hurts, or oh, I'm tired, or nothing. You do it no matter what. And the Tibetans and Himalayan peoples act that way. They're extremely rugged. But I wasn't a Tibetan. I was a soft, squishy American pretending to be a Tibetan, and I got hurt. I got really hurt. I got really sick, and I felt as if I couldn't continue. I felt like I more and more needed to lay down and take breaks. I felt more and more like I needed to take time off away from the temple. I was generally one of the chopins of the temple, which is one of the people that is responsible for enacting rituals and preparing things and being a helper to the main lamas. And, it's a relatively big responsibility, especially depending on what temple you go to. It can be a massive responsibility, but it certainly was something that I felt extremely obligated to. And it was beginning to crush me. The weight of everything was beginning to crush me, and my feeling that I had all these deep emotional problems, and I had been taught so many profound, excellent, exalted practices, and they were not being resolved. the emotional problems were not being resolved in a way that was satisfactory or reassuring. I felt my heart growing, I felt my wisdom growing, I felt my understanding growing, but yet there was this great weight inside me, and it was getting worse because really a lot of it stemmed from my relationship with my father, and my Lama was, as Lamas are for many people, sort of a stand-in for a father figure, and I really, really needed some recognition, because I certainly didn't get it from my father. I needed it, and I didn't get it. You know, I told my Kempo straight out, you know, I need you to tell me that I'm doing a good job. I need you to tell me that I've done well, that I've worked hard, and that, you know, that I'm gonna be okay. Because I'm just feeling so bewildered and sunken. And he said essentially no. You know, that, you know, it's right that you should be sunken and bewildered because that's an appropriate form of motivation. Well, the thing is that it's like, and he still disagrees with me on this to this day, but I feel this is what's in my heart to say, is that, you know, people have limits, and people can be broken, and people can snap, and people can fall down. And there were some other negative incidents due to problems with the Sangha, and my behavior becoming more volatile as I started to succumb to my anger and my pride and jealousy, and all the other negative emotions. I was both attacked and also attacked others and embarrassed them in the emotional and verbal sense. I embarrassed myself incredibly, and I left. And I left with, the express intention of finding a way to resolve those negative emotional issues and negative emotional problems. And so I created a very basic system of meditation, and I found some other teachers who were able to teach me some very simple fundamentals outside of the system of Tibetan Buddhism that pointed me in the right direction. It wasn't the whole picture, but it pointed me in the right direction. It gave me somewhere that I could see I could manage to make results. And because I had already done practices to the point of giving rise to extraordinary signs and extreme self-transformation, I understood that meditation could change me if I applied effort and discipline. And so I spent the next 6 years searching for sanity and chipping away at insanity bit by bit until I was satisfied that I understood what was meant by, peace of mind, sanity, contentment, inner happiness, and I understood that it was a system that I could codify, and that I could explain, and that other people could follow. And I was lucky enough to have some good friends who were willing to try what I had to recommend. And lo and behold, they were able to gain the same results. And to conclude, the reason... Actually, let me stop for 1 second. My friends were not Buddhists. They were, if anything, atheists. They went through the programs that I outlined, which are completely agnostic, no need to believe in anything but your own mind and body, and to be brave enough to face your negative emotions. And they saw transformation, they saw results, they saw that, okay, I apply myself in this discipline and I can change. And the way that it is laid out is that you can very much target the things that you want to change. So, if you're struggling with what relationship, or you're dealing with whatever particular problem, whether it's like, I don't have a lot of faith in myself in this avenue or this part of my life, that those things can be dealt with directly. And that was very much my goal. My goal when I started looking for answers was, how do I deal with my addiction? How do I deal with my shame? How do I deal with the lack of love I feel from the people that created me? How do I find a source of love within myself that satisfies the longing to be accepted? And just briefly, it's not as if people didn't accept me, it's not as if other people didn't embrace me, but it doesn't matter how many people embrace you externally if you don't embrace yourself internally. If you don't actually love yourself, no matter how many people love you, you can't actually feel it. You can't actually benefit from other people's love, because it's like the clouds blocking out the sun. If you fundamentally disagree with the premise that you are worthy of love, even when love shows up, you can't bring yourself to enjoy it. So anyway, my students were able to give rise to great results, and then after which they knew very well that I was a Buddhist, and became curious in that. And because of the foundations that I had laid for them, they found it very easy to gain results in the Tibetan system. And I've seen very, very few people actually gain legitimate results in the Tibetan Vajrayana system. I've seen many people have glowing moments. I've seen many people, have some bliss when the Lama is present. That's very common. I have not seen people have wisdom. I have not seen people become morally ironclad. I have not seen people become content. I've not seen people have a light that they could pass on to others and help others with I see instead a lot of, when people, the blind leading the blind, and I see a lot of codependent action, people expressing compassion in ways that are sort of subconsciously engineered to allow them to feel like a savior or to feel like a good person in search of what I have described before, a remedy to their own dislike of themselves. So inauthentic. So I've seen those students that have wished to practice Buddhism in the ways that I have, gain extremely positive results and extraordinary, like high-level results. And, I know of less than a handful of people that have done that are not toku, that are not recognized, enthroned lamas. Most people in the Sangha I have seen stagnate, and they're, even when they're highly recognized by their lamas, they still seem caged by hope and fear, and by their negativities. They don't have a stability of wisdom that tells them not to be disturbed by the illusion of temporal reality, which is always changing. Time is changing everything. Time is always removing things. Time is always breaking things down. Time is always transforming things. And so there is an endless loss that never stops. And if you don't have contentment with that, then obviously there's a lack of wisdom. And also, if your triggers still exist, if things still, if it's common for you to become disturbed by other people's behavior, or by traffic, or whatever other simple things, wisdom is lacking, because you're getting wrapped up in the moment, what Buddhists would call appearances, and not seeing the bigger picture, which is that this is that you are always on the hero's journey, and you are always on your path to becoming a greater and more perfect person. And so even if you have negative things happen to you, that they are just another expression of the Buddha's compassion, and because they have within them the potential to transform you and to bring you to a greater place. And knowing that, not just philosophizing it, not just speaking it, but knowing it from your heart and acting accordingly, is the sign of wisdom. And I have heard so much philosophizing and so much discussion of, oh, this tantra and this yoga and this practice, and oh, this is very profound, oh, this is so profound, and this and that. But then, what happens with those students? They stay in their lives. They stay in the same place that they started, and they don't, they generally will generate faith and devotion, which is like a doorway. But then I see stagnation, because the obstacle of unworthiness remains, and the many obstacles of their different triggers, kalesha, emotional negative patterns, stays. And so what I'm here to say is that I think Americans are extremely valuable. I think they have the potential to reach enlightenment as much or more so than any other cultural group, and that what fundamentally needs to happen is that they need to be brought to a place where they can experience happiness and inner joy and inner peace first. And sometimes when I describe these practices, some people go, oh yeah, that's Buddhism. And it's not Buddhism. Buddhism never focuses on happiness. It exclusively says life is suffering. It even explicitly says happiness is suffering. But that's, and so the purpose of Buddhism is to transcend life and death itself, to end the cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death, to no longer be reborn in ordinary fashion. And so it's not Buddhism to wish or want for happiness. And Buddhism fundamentally expects you to relinquish happiness. That's what they call the principle of renunciation. Letting go of what you cherish, letting go of what you're attached to. That's why they say attachment is one of the great sources of suffering. So what are we attached to? We're attached to happiness. We're attached to feeling good. So letting go of feeling good is not why most people are entering the temple. They're entering the temple to feel good. So let them feel good. Let them know what it is to feel good from their own center, not from some phenomena that revolves around profound spiritual experiences happening in the presence of extraordinarily transcendent or powerful people, or from some sort of narrative of, oh yeah, I'm a part of this temple, or I'm a student of this person, and so I'm special, which is just fraught with danger. It's like a crystal glass, sliding off the table. It's just, you're just destined to meet with your own fragility. So you have to find it within your heart to actually love life. And that is a skill which requires understanding how emotions actually affect you, how emotions can be transformed and dissolved and removed, how emotions can be generated, and to essentially restore your emotional life to a human decency, human goodness, a basic goodness, so that if you were to decide, and I do not want to obligate anybody to follow Buddhism that doesn't interest it. I want Christians and atheists and any other group. I don't care what religion you practice or don't practice. I don't care where you come from. Even if you're somebody that is on the fringes. I want you to be able to use these tools to find your own happiness. Now, for those that are wishing to excel at Buddhism and are Americans, the thing I believe you really require is to experience happiness, to know what it is like to have your own sense of goodness and joy without the need to strive or prove anything. And if you can find a way to feel happiness without needing to strive or prove anything, then at that point, if you understand the basic philosophies of Dharma, of Buddhism, then you can make a choice to follow the path of the Buddha, which means renunciation, which means making a decision to let go of the happiness you found. But how do you let go? How do you renounce the good things of samsara, as Shanideva would say, without knowing what those things are? You can't start from a place of suffering, longing for happiness, and say, oh yes, I'm willing to relinquish everything. Your hunger for contentment must know satisfaction, and if you don't feel satisfied, if you don't feel like, oh, I have a good life now, then you cannot contemplate the faults of life. Because when you are suffering, when you are dealing with extreme negativities within your mind and heart, you're just looking to put out the fire. You're just running towards the water. You're not actually looking for great and lofty goals. It doesn't mean you can't have great and lofty goals. It doesn't mean you can't have thoughts of what they call bodhicitta or unconditional love, or the wish to liberate all sentient beings from suffering. But again, that can be so codependent. It can be so much based on, oh, I will liberate all sentient beings and then I'll be somebody special, or I'll be recognized, or people will like me, and then somehow that will translate into me finally feeling worthy. So feel worthy first, and then if you want to take on the burden of the suffering of the entire world, feel free to do so. But also, feel happy first, and then if you're satisfied with that, then go on and live your life. You know, if you find what you were looking for and you're content with it, then you go on and live your life. Don't spin your wheels, you know. Go out and you know, do it. Whatever it is that you've always wanted to do, go out and do it, you know, because the odds are that, you know, these weights that you're carrying, the shame and grief and sadness and depression and all these things that you've been carrying, have held you back from ever from achieving your dreams. And it's fundamentally absurd for you to aspire to give up everything, you know, to relinquish your dreams, if you don't even know if those dreams are a sincere part of your life, something you need to experience, something that you are desperate to have. You may find that if you achieve happiness and contentment, that those things will go away, because they may just be the mirages of the promise of happiness elsewhere, which is common. But sometimes there's things, you know, that you need to do. There's some things that you need to accomplish because your heart, cries out for them, even after you're completely content with life. And at that point, if your heart is clear, there's enough wisdom there for you to know your own path. You don't need someone else to tell you what to do. You have confidence in your own heart to tell you what is right for you. And that's another thing. Instead of being caged by the notion that you are so faulty that you need some other person on a throne to tell you what's right for you, and I confess if this is disparaging anything sacred in any way, but it's important because I've seen people damaged by this notion, extremely damaged by this notion of having to surrender to someone else's will in order to gain enlightenment or freedom from suffering or happiness or whatever. It's very important that you find your own happiness, and then if you wish to give up that happiness, then that's a choice you get to make when the time comes. And this is the great chasm of American Buddhists, is that we are less human beings and we are more hungry ghosts. We are more starving for some sort of transcendent satisfaction. And that is absolutely not the purpose of Buddhism. That is the purpose of the ego, which is the fundamental villain in the story of the Buddha Dharma. The ego is the thing to be vanquished. Well, the ego is the thing that wants happiness. So, know happiness. Find a way to happiness. And I can teach you some very pragmatic and practical tools which may suit you. There's no monopoly on the truth. So if you find your own way, then good for you. But if you're not sure and you feel some connection to what I'm saying, then please very much consider trying the preliminary practices of what I am tentatively calling your greatest potential. And you can do it. And I'm not interested in being worshipped. I'm not interested in being put on a high throne. Whatever's clever. Can sit in a folding chair if that's what's necessary. I can sit on the floor if that's what's necessary. No problem. I don't need anyone to serve me or worship me as some icon of enlightenment. It's not necessary. I just have a longing to transmit what I fought extremely hard for, which I suffered deeply for, and which I know is effective. I have taught this to other people. I have seen the results. You can do it too. It's just a step-by-step process of understanding your emotions and then being able to remove those emotions which trouble you and to increase those emotions which lift you up, and to fundamentally engineer your inner world, all of which is extremely mechanical. There's nothing superstitious or spiritual about it. It is just finding the object of emotion as opposed to the mystery of emotion. And I'll say this much. Most people cannot even identify what an emotion is. And believe me, and I will happily share later, or if people want to inquire to receive lessons directly, emotions are directly identifiable and can be described in very certain understandable terms, which makes them immediately workable when they act as they normally do in people's lives, as sort of phantoms or ghosts that just emerge and oppress them, often when they are trying to do something good for themselves. They're not workable. And so most people spend their entire lives running from these phantoms instead of taking care of them, instead of resolving them. And they can be resolved with relative swiftness. And then you can move on with your life, and you can begin to pursue the things that you wish to pursue. You can be self-determined. You cannot be self-determined if you are haunted. If you are being hunted by stress and despair and depression and whatnot, anxiety, social anxiety, fear of retribution, fear of one thing or another, it's as if your life decisions have been already made for you, because there's a door number 1 and door number 2, and behind door number 2 is what you want. But in front of door number 2 is some terrifying emotional problem which you lack the fortitude or courage or understanding to navigate. And that's what I'm looking to give you: the ability to navigate your own emotional life, the ability to find a way around things. Now, I know many people promise this sort of thing. There's an obnoxious amount of self-help people. What I am offering is not some set of affirmations. It's not some set of do this with your life and do that with your life and do this with your life. No. This is a meditative program that is extremely practical, pragmatic, straightforward, and step by step, and will immediately produce results. And the thing is when you immediately produce results, when you finally are able to dissolve some great obstacle which has held you back, that in and of itself becomes the motivating factor for you to finish the job and finally find your sanity, happiness, and your own inner goodness, your own belief in your worthiness. Because once one boulder is moved, you understand that you can move the whole mountain if you simply apply yourself. Once it works on one emotional obstacle, you understand it will work on all emotional obstacles. So I started out saying that there are certain cultural divides which make accomplishing Tibetan or Bhutanese or whatever form of Vajrayana Buddhism you're practicing difficult. And the number one divide and misunderstanding is self-hatred, the deep feeling of unworthiness that Americans feel naturally, that makes them, which is a positive actually. It's actually one of the things that makes Americans extremely successful, is we always feel like we must do not better, but best. We always feel like we must be the absolute greatest. We always feel like we need to be the champion of whatever task we're undertaking. And that does not blend well with the long haul, shut your mouth and do the work, and in a couple decades everything will work itself out, sort of deterministic attitude of the Himalayan people. They're not interested in the notion that you're suffering with this problem or that problem, and they will just simply repeat themselves and just say like, "I'll just do more practice," and there's no particular novel solution to any particular emotional problem, and there is little in the way of resolution, and that's another thing that can be offered, that I feel confident I can offer, is if you have like any direct emotional problem that you're working on, I feel that I could help you move through that much more quickly. Even if you don't want to learn some, step-by-step method, we can at least work on some small thing together. So again, I feel I am fitting myself into the role of someone who is helping you with emotional difficulties and the struggle to feel worthy of whatever path you decide to pursue, and the struggle to feel confident and unencumbered. And again, even though many people seek out one form of Buddhism or another, or one form of religion or another to help them with that, it doesn't always simply pull them out of the muck. It doesn't, always, it rarely resolves the deep wounds and neurotic problems which caused them to search out a solution in the first place. And when it comes to religion is, from what I can see, except for a few religions which are closer to philosophy, they are linked to transcending this world. They're linked to heaven, which is outside of this world and outside of the accomplishments of this world. It's a divorce from the personal happiness of this life. It's not a way to improve, and it gets sold as that, and that's troubling. And it's also a lie, or at least a misrepresentation of the bigger picture of the whole truth. So if you want happiness, you have to focus on removing those things that bring sadness and cultivating those things which bring happiness. And those are not objects, those are not accomplishments, those are not material objects, accumulations, what have you. Happiness is happiness. Sadness is sadness. Cultivating happiness means cultivating happiness. It's an emotional process, a purely emotional process. Remove the sadness, increase the happiness, until it becomes wholly habituated within you to feel happy, confident, free, joyous, then life will be better. It will be much better. If you go the other route and you seek out some sort of material gain, I'm willing to bet that you will be at least secretly disappointed. There may be some initial excitement, but then soon afterwards there is a return of the original problems which caused you to strive so hard in the first place. So, if you want to learn the methods which I'm describing, and you're part of one religion or another, and you would like to remove some deep-seated obstacle that you feel is keeping you from practicing your religion well or excelling in your spiritual practices, I am confident that it is highly likely I can help you do that. I won't say across the board, because some people are far too stubborn to be taught anything. But if you're open and you're willing to try, there's an extremely strong chance that you will get positive results in ways that you did not realize were possible, even if you have received, like me, years and years and years and years of formal spiritual training. Spiritual training and emotional training do not always coincide. And often, spiritual training involves a great deal of stoicism, which is actually to simply squash your emotions down or ignore them. And emotions are debtors. They will not just leave you because you don't want to deal with them. They will come back again and again, and every time they do come back, they will become louder and louder until they create a serious crisis of heart. So don't wait for that. Learn how to transform yourself. I will try and make more specific videos on this as I gather my resources, but I would really actually prefer to teach people directly. I think it's a better way to go. It's up to you. All right. So this is Lama Rigze saying, have a good day, have a good week, month, year in life. Tashi Dele, which is Tibetan for, good luck, auspiciousness, happiness to you, and you are loved.